faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally Talks Books. Today we'll explore the book The Origin of Wealth. Back in 1987, Citibank's chairman and CEO, Reed, faced a tough problem. The bank had lent huge sums to Latin American developing nations in the 70s, but when financial crisis hit, their currencies crashed, economies collapsed, and they couldn't repay, costing Citibank billions overnight. Reed desperately wanted to understand how this crisis actually happened. He consulted many economists but found no useful answers, growing utterly disillusioned with economics. So he turned his attention to other fields of study until he discovered the Santa Fe Institute, a U.S. nonprofit bringing together top scientists across disciplines. After connecting with the Institute, Reed got really excited. He saw economic systems as incredibly complex, believing traditional approaches were outdated. He felt scientists and economists needed unstructured dialogue, freewheeling conversations that might spark breakthroughs. So he organized a high-level workshop, 10 economists led by Nobel laureate Arrow, and 10 Santa Fe scientists, physicists, biologists, computer experts. Hearing the scientists' ideas, the economist got super energized. But the Santa Fe scientists just stared in disbelief when economists spoke, like seeing cavemen, shocked at how primitive economic theory still was. Now, why would they say that? This book gives you the answer. The author, Beinhocker, is an external professor at Santa Fe, Oxford Public Policy professor, and heads the Institute for New Economic Thinking. He also spent 18 years at McKinsey as partner in their Global Institute. In this book, Beinhocker draws from multiple disciplines to dissect traditional economic models, building evolutionary economics, a new framework explaining everything from markets to human society. I'll break this down into 4 key sections exploring the book's core insights. Part 1. Beinhocker's Critique of Traditional Economics. Part 2. Beinhocker's New Theory, Evolutionary Economics. Part 3. How do economic systems evolve? Part 4. How can we apply evolutionary economics? Let's begin with Part 1. Adam Smith, the founding father of economics, focused on answering 2 key questions in his masterpiece, The Wealth of Nations. First question, how is wealth created? Second question, how is wealth distributed? So how did Adam Smith explain this? He believed people obtain raw materials from the environment, then transform them through labor into needed products, creating economic value, which is wealth. How do we maximize wealth then? 2 conditions are needed. First, a free competitive market. In this market, people freely choose to exchange. Second condition, everyone pursues self-interest, because to earn more, people strive to meet others' needs. In Smith's words, each person is guided by an invisible hand, pursuing self-interest while promoting society's wealth. That invisible hand is the free market. The free market's analytical framework. Simply put, 2 market players, producers and consumers. 1 competitive mechanism, price. In essence, market prices adjust transactions. Behavior dynamics. Price rises, production increases, consumption decreases, price falls, production decreases, consumption increases. This process resembles 2 people on a seesaw, constantly seeking balance around the price pivot. This process is market equilibrium, mainstream economics. Economists believe there's always an equilibrium price where production equals consumption, clearing the market. But market equilibrium exists only in theory, never achieved in reality. Nevertheless, economists like Walras persistently pursued equilibrium, his contribution, mathematical modeling of market balance. Later, Pareto, Samuelson, Arrow, Friedman, Lucas continued Walras's approach. In summary, these economists maintained markets can achieve equilibrium. Beinhocker terms this equilibrium-focused approach traditional economics. He says, if we picture traditional economics as an ancient church, Walras was the architect, and 20th century economists were the builders who constructed this church of market equilibrium. But they didn't realize that, over time, the foundation of this church has become increasingly unstable. Why would we say that? Because Beinhocker argues that traditional economics has 5 fundamental assumptions. and they're all problematic. The first assumption, the law of supply and demand. This law claims that supply and demand balance out to hit an equilibrium point where they're perfectly equal at a certain price. But in reality, that perfect price point and balance have never actually happened. Second assumption, the law of one price. It says that without shipping costs or trade barriers, a product should cost the same everywhere. But that doesn't exist in the real world either. Well, in reality, barriers and costs are everywhere, so this law just doesn't hold up. Third, the rational man assumption. This assumes people always make rational, cool-headed decisions for their own good. But that's completely unrealistic.
Like in the stock market, decisions are driven by emotions, either fear or greed.
Fourth assumption, equilibrium systems. It's borrowed from physics, treating the economy as a closed system that naturally stabilizes over time. Walras, who proposed this, was still in the Newtonian physics era. Modern physics, however, embraces the second law of thermodynamics. Simply put, the physical world is an open system with constant energy flow, and eventually all structures break down. The fifth assumption, abstract models. Once math and physics entered economics, analysis became just theoretical exercises. They use simple assumptions, elegant models, and complex calculations to predict trends, but forget a fatal truth. Reality is far messier and more volatile than any model.
So, Beinhocker concludes, the traditional economics church has unstable foundations. We need different thinking and a whole new perspective.
All right, that wraps up part one. Now on to part two. Beinhocker's new theory is complex economics, which can also be called evolutionary economics. Before introducing his own theory, Beinhocker spent a lot of time describing an experiment. In 1995, two scholars did something. They wondered if there was a way to mimic how economic systems evolve. So they set up a scenario in a computer, an isolated desert island with only one resource, sugar, and people scattered around doing just three things: finding sugar, moving, and eating sugar. Doesn't that sound like a simple video game? Characters in a game. They act based on a few basic rules. At first, people were randomly placed, but ended up clustering around sugar sources. Where there's more sugar, there are more people, and the rich get richer while the poor get poorer. It follows the Pareto principle, where 20% of people control 80% of the wealth. This simulation is called Sugarscape. Later, new elements like trading, borrowing, marriage, and genetics were added, making the system more chaotic, widening wealth gaps, and increasing complexity. It developed tribes, trade routes, banks, and more, becoming eerily similar to real life. The Sugarscape experiment caused a big stir. People were amazed that economic systems like natural ones could evolve into highly complex structures from just a few basic rules. Oh, this is totally different from traditional economics take. Traditional economics assumes the economy is a closed, static, linear equilibrium system. But Sugarscape reveals an open, dynamic, nonlinear, non-equilibrium system. In a nutshell, Sugarscape is a complex system that traditional economics just can't explain. Beinhocker started building the framework for complex economics. He laid 5 cornerstones for this framework, which are the 5 basic assumptions of complex economics. The first cornerstone is that the economy is a dynamic system. Fundamentally, it's an interconnected web. Traditional economics admits this, but it's not enough. The economy is also dynamic, like how bank balances change over time. So money flows like water. How do we describe that water flow? Well, mainly by stocks and flows. If you think of an account as a reservoir, the stock is the water inside, and the flow is what's coming in and going out. The interaction mechanism between stocks and flows is the feedback loop. Feedback loops have a self-reinforcing effect. For instance, in an economic system, if interest rates go up, loan amounts drop, money for production and consumption decreases, trade volume falls, incomes shrink, and jobs decline, that's the feedback loop in action. Oh. Feedback loops include both positive and negative feedback. The simplest way to understand it is that increasing connections are called positive feedback. Decreasing connections are called negative feedback, positive and negative feedback. Just like action and reaction in physics, they pull the economic system's changes back and forth.
The most classic example is inflation and deflation. The constant shifts result from the combined effect of positive and negative feedback.
The second cornerstone is that people in economic systems make decisions through inductive reasoning. Traditional economics assumes people are perfectly rational and self-interested. But more and more scientific research shows humans are emotional and impulsive, with strong altruistic and cooperative spirits. For example, psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, decades of research prove there are many psychological and cognitive biases that greatly impact decision-making. In his bestseller Thinking, Fast and Slow, Kahneman explains that the brain evolved two systems, intuition and reason, with intuition being the real star. Intuition is the ability to make quick decisions, needing only minimal information to judge and react. That's why Beinhocker says people's economic decisions are essentially based on experiential induction, not strict deductive reasoning. The third cornerstone is that the economy is a complex interactive network. If you observe a city you live in, you'll notice many networks, like road systems, power grids, banking networks, chain stores, etc. These networks consist of interconnected nodes, and the economic system is similar. As nodes increase, the number of connections grows exponentially, and this exponential growth forms economies of scale. In traditional economics, economies of scale can create monopolies for competitive advantage, but monopolies suppress innovation. But complex economics argues that once economies of scale hit a critical point, they can spark innovation explosions, driving rapid economic growth. For example, the internet was born in the 1960s, and for the next 20 years, its development was very slow, mainly used for research. And, but when its applications reached a certain scale, it suddenly exploded in the 90s, giving birth to the massive internet economy. Of course, economies of scale also lead to two outcomes.
First, silos, like bureaucratization in large organizations, where compartmentalized structures hinder change and innovation.
Second, the ripple effect.
Any local change can trigger a crisis across the entire network.
The most effective way to resolve such crises is to change the structure, thereby altering the rules. For example, a bureaucratic organization can reduce hierarchy, merge departments, and break down barriers to lower connection density, improve information flow and decision-making agility, regaining adaptability. EANTO. The fourth cornerstone is that the economy is a bottom-up emergent phenomenon. What does that mean? It's like a grand symphony, formed by each instrument's contribution, yet transcending any single voice. Similarly, the economic symphony emerges from participants' collaboration and resonance, creating melodies and rhythms. That's emergence. There are three patterns. First, oscillation, like pendulum swinging, guitar strings vibrating, heartbeats pulsing. Imagine a grassland with just rabbits and foxes. Their populations form an oscillating relationship. More rabbits mean more foxes. More foxes then reduce rabbits, which reduces foxes. These fluctuations stem from their intrinsic relationship, not external supply chains. That's the core dynamic. Developers, manufacturers, retailers, service providers, and consumers form an ecosystem chain where changes propagate with delays and biases, perpetually oscillating between oversupply and shortages, never reaching equilibrium. And the second emergence pattern is punctuated equilibrium. The most famous example is biological evolution. Paleontologists discovered evolution isn't linear as Darwin thought, but cycles of mass extinctions followed by explosive diversification. This is called punctuated equilibrium. This pattern also originates from a system's internal structure. For instance, in long-evolved food chains, keystone species like amoebas at the bottom, if external forces drastically reduce them, the entire chain collapses. It's like an avalanche. Snow on mountains has dense and sparse structures inside. When external forces create density imbalances, avalanches happen. After collapse, new connections begin forming innovations. When key new species emerge, the whole food chain reactivates with explosive growth. For economies, technologies act like these external forces. Steam engines, telegraphs, computers, internet, all disruptive innovations pushing economies into new eras. The third pattern is power law distribution. Power, as in cubed or squared. Power law refers to statistical regularity. It's a statistical concept showing quantity relationships, like smaller earthquakes happening more frequently than massive ones. Similarly, the Pareto principle is classic power law. Fewer wealthy people, more poor people. Power law distributions appear in complex systems, extinction scales, solar flares, traffic jams, stock markets. Beinhocker emphasizes emergence patterns to show emergence is a natural law, an inherent design. You can only work with it, not against it. The fifth cornerstone, the economy is an evolutionary system. Some say modernity's greatest discoveries are, first, Copernicus and Galileo shattering Earth as center bias. Second, Darwin's evolution theory destroying human as Earth-center notions. Third, Freud's subconscious shattering the illusion of human self-mastery. Growing evidence shows the universe and humans are evolutionary products, so human-created economic systems naturally evolve too. Beinhocker firmly believes economic evolution theory comes from observing biological evolution. How does it work? British biologist Dawkins proposed the selfish gene, explaining evolution's core principle. Nature favors genes that help survival through self-replication. Nature is a testing ground where species constantly compete. Only survivors get more chances. Nature doesn't care who lives or dies, only that evolution continues, making evolution nature's ultimate game. A random, purposeless game, a survival competition involving selection, mutation, and self-replication. That concludes part 2. To summarize, Beinhocker proposes 5 assumptions for complex economics: dynamic systems, inductive reasoning, interactive networks, emergence patterns, and evolutionary systems, defining the economy as an evolving complex system following selection, variation, and amplification. Therefore, complex economics is essentially evolutionary economics. Now let's move to part 3. How exactly do economic systems evolve? Economic systems exist within social systems, which have 2 foundational supports: physical technology and social technology. Building on these 2 designs, business design develops, forming the economic system. Beinhocker argues that the interweaving of physical technology, social technology, and business design drives economic evolution. So what is physical technology? It's methods for transforming matter, energy, and information, consisting of 2 elements: components and structures. Over time, both the number of components and their combination methods increase, both being fundamental innovation strategies. Now, so which innovation strategies succeed? Beinhocker believes it's through deduction and exploration. People reason using existing knowledge, then experiment repeatedly, amplifying successful outcomes. This process is the evolutionary mechanism of physical technology. Then what is social technology? Per Beinhocker's definition, it's methods for organizing people toward common goals. Originally, families were the primary cooperative units. Men's strength and hunting skills secured more resources. Gradually, cooperation emerged between people. Hunting groups mainly consisted of relatives. After agriculture appeared, people settled permanently. Resource accumulation enabled population growth, further stimulating wealth accumulation, creating scaled economies and more complex social systems.
Meanwhile, trade began between tribes, but a problem emerged. With increased wealth, how should it be distributed?
The earliest solution was gender hierarchy, like patriarchal clans, where men dominated, had multiple spouses and offspring, creating evolutionary-based ranking systems. Even today, hierarchical systems dominate human operations, but they also bring profound crises. For example, when wealth gets redistributed, powerful challengers emerge, often triggering wars. To avoid violence and loss, innovations appeared like primogeniture, modern democratic elections, and joint stock companies, all social technology innovations. So how does business design come about? For instance, businesses are the basic economic units. Production requires 4 inputs: natural resources, equipment, raw materials, labor, and entrepreneurial skill. These four elements represent the integration of physical and social technologies. Production equipment transforms natural resources into products, physical tech, while labor and entrepreneurial skills organize and manage social tech. Only by combining these two can businesses form and produce. Questions like what to produce, how much, and how constitute business design. Thus, business design links physical and social technologies through business activities. It's an evolutionary process too, following deduction and exploration. Business design starts with an idea, maybe from managers or employees. Then comes decision-making, setting goals, exploring options, choosing one, and taking action. This involves mechanisms centered on communication, where information and perspectives constantly collide to adjust actions and strategies. If the business design works well, more resources get invested. Meanwhile, the experience and knowledge are replicated and imitated, spreading within companies and across markets.
Thus, business units expand into standalone firms, joining larger economies via mergers. Successful designs thrive like genes, same replication principle.
That concludes part 3. Simply put, economic systems are driven by business design, social tech, and physical tech, each following evolutionary principles of selection, variation, and amplification. So wealth evolves through the transmission of knowledge. Finally, let's cover part 4, how to apply evolutionary economics. Beinhocker highlights 4 key application areas. The first is corporate strategy, where firms are central in microeconomics. As market players, how can firms win in competition? That's the problem strategy aims to solve. Beinhocker argues that traditional economists define strategy with 2 common assumptions. First, strategy is forward-looking, enabling prediction of the future through planning. Second, strategy is a commitment, meaning sustained investment and dedication to the market. Otherwise, it's easily imitated and surpassed. But in Beinhocker's view, both assumptions are flawed, because the future is mostly random events, so it can't be accurately predicted. Since prediction is impossible, so-called sustainable advantages are unlikely. In reality, cognitive biases from the past can trigger deep crises for firms.
Researchers Wiggins and Ruffley analyzed 6,772 firms across 40 U.S. industries over 23 years, with shocking results.
Among firms with real advantages, only 5% lasted over 10 years, just 0.5% over 20 years, and a mere 0.04% over 50 years, with replacement rates accelerating and doubling. This confirms the evolutionary view. The only way for firms to survive is to outrun and outperform competitors. In other words, firms must innovate continuously. No innovation means certain elimination. The market is an efficient purification machine. Firms must keep pace. So, how can firms be truly efficient? Beinhocker's suggestion is to bring the market's purification mechanism inside firms. For example, the internal horse race mechanism widely used by big tech companies is exactly this approach. The WeChat we commonly use as a product of Tencent's internal horse race. The second application area is corporate organization, where firms interact in the economic evolutionary system as agents of business design. If corporate strategy is about finding the right business design in the market, then organization's purpose is to ensure its success, facing a fundamental contradiction. On one hand, to achieve goals, current plans must be executed. On the other, to adapt to the future, plans must change. How should organizations respond? Beinhocker analyzes from 3 angles: individual, structural, and cultural. First, individual obstacles stem from mental models. Blind optimism, loss aversion, rigid stereotypes, all deep-seated human weaknesses that breed bias and errors, demanding constant vigilance. Then structure, its adaptability, mainly involves balancing hierarchies and processes. Typically, simple tasks with few processes require minimal hierarchies.
Conversely, complex tasks with fragmented processes demand more hierarchies. When vertical hierarchies and horizontal processes intertwine, they form structures. Multi-layered complex structures suit execution, simpler ones favor innovation.
Structure's core trait is stability. Once set, it resists change, but one force can compensate: organizational culture. Beinhocker believes cultures promoting equality, openness, honesty, and trust enhance collaboration and innovation, preventing structural rigidity. Evolution. The third application is finance. Economics' lifeblood and evolution's prime observation ground. Finance directly reflects transactions and accumulates vast historical data. From centuries of massive data, we see evolution's power. For Beinhocker, financial markets host diverse traders with varied mental models and strategies. Over time, traders influence each other, constantly learning and adjusting. Successful strategies replicate. In this process, markets' internal structures, rules, interaction patterns, accumulated experience, and time are critical factors. Centuries of data show markets constantly swing between balance and chaos, with stock prices deviating severely from value, sometimes for decades. Thus, Beinhocker concludes financial markets aren't balanced or efficient, they're high-efficiency purification systems. Back to Citibank's meeting, traditional economists used equilibrium theory to analyze the crisis, clearly inadequate. Beinhocker sees markets running on evolutionary laws, not mathematical models. In other words, financial crises are inevitable. Whether a bank survives depends on insight and luck. The fourth application area of evolutionary economics is public policy. As a professor in social policy, Beinhocker poses a final question: how can we distribute wealth fairly? Discussions on this issue have always been polarized between left and right, like self-interest versus altruism, poor versus rich, state versus market, liberalism versus conservatism, public needs versus individual rights. Beinhocker's stance transcends left-right divisions, focusing instead on the fundamental question: how can human society develop better? He introduces a core concept called strong reciprocity, an evolved human trait. It means individuals have both self-interested and altruistic sides. Through strong reciprocity, human society collectively escapes prisoners' dilemmas and progresses. But looking at internal disparities and inequality within societies remains shocking. Individually, starting point inequality, family background, race, gender, cognitive ability, health, massively impact development. Group differences like geography, natural conditions, education, economic base, social systems, and religion also vary greatly. When individual and group differences intertwine, social inequality intensifies. Since we want better societal development, eliminating inequality is essential. So how do we eliminate it?
The author believes the best approach combines market and government forces.
With complex economics, systemic with governance market synergy, the state establishes institutional frameworks supporting market operations, balancing cooperation and competition to better meet societal needs. Simultaneously, under strong reciprocity principles, ensure equal opportunity for all citizens to participate in the economic system with basic security. Markets then promote business design development, replicating successful models.
Another crucial factor: culture shapes economic values like altruism, trust, cooperation, directly influencing reciprocity strength.
With more cooperation and reciprocity, society naturally improves. Beinhocker ultimately grounds evolutionary economics in social progress, conveying his humanistic stance.
Evolution doesn't equal progress. It's natural, purposeless, and brutally harsh.
But humans have purpose and consciousness, so we can make society better. That wraps up the key insights of this book for you. In Beinhocker's view, traditional economics' fundamental assumptions are unreliable. There's no self-equilibrating market economy. Instead, it's a dynamic, complex system where wealth originates from evolution, specifically the continuous evolution of physical tech, social tech, and business design drives wealth accumulation. All right, that concludes our exploration of the origin of wealth. You'll find reading notes below the audio. See you next time.